Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So Spider-Man Far From Home marks the end of phase 3 of the MCU. I know, I cannot believe it's only been 3 phases considering how long the MCU has been running for at this point. But in the spirit of the release of the film, I thought it would be fun to go ahead and rank the films within phase 3. I wanted to go ahead and rank all of the films in the MCU, but that would be a crazy person's task, and I'm not feeling crazy today, so we're just going to be doing phase 3 of these films. Now, this will not be a review of the films, although where I do have reviews available on my channel, I will link them down in the description box below. There will definitely be spoilers in this video, including spoilers for Spider-Man Far From Home. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. So as per usual, I am going to be ranking these films from least favorite to most favorite. And so in that spirit, at number 11, we have Captain Marvel. Yes, this was a very much contested film online for all of these political reasons that we will not get into right now. But when it comes down to it, in my opinion, this film was just largely underwhelming. It was a very middle of the road Marvel film. I said as much in my review. This phase in the MCU was just so spectacular. If you look up the lineup, it's just absolutely incredible what they had to offer. And so middle of the road was nowhere near enough to really impress me considering everything else that they had on offer. And so that's why I feel like this film is at the bottom of the list, not necessarily because it's a terrible Marvel film. I actually think there are any terrible films in the MCU, but this one was just, it was okay. Like, it was fine. I haven't gone back to rewatch it. I haven't felt the need to be honest. And to add insult to injury, I feel like the character of Captain Marvel was portrayed far better in Avengers Endgame in her limited appearance there, because in her own film she was just too stoic, she was too unfeeling, and the jokes that she did say, the kind of quips that she had, didn't really land for me. The character was just too much of a blank slate, and that was of course the nature of the story itself because she had lost her memory, but it just didn't quite work to sell me on the character of Captain Marvel. I've already discussed how I didn't love the way that Nick Fury was portrayed here. I didn't love how infatuated he was with that alien cat. I didn't love that the alien cat was the reason why he had lost his eye. God damn it, that was not the plan starting from Winter Soldier. You can fight me on that. The fight sequences were bland, the locations were bland and nondescript. A lot of this film just felt bland in my opinion. The song choices were also very obvious, very obviously 90s, very obviously feminist. There was just no nuance there. So overall, Captain Marvel really wasn't my favorite out of this lineup, and as a result it ends up dead last on my list today. At number 10 we have Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I don't think this will come to anyone's surprise here because this was another one that was just largely underwhelming. I had to really split hairs in order to decide which order I would place these two last films, but the main difference for me when it comes to Captain Marvel and Ant-Man is, even though the films are technically on roughly the same level in terms of, you know, blandness and middle of the roadness, standout really is Paul Rudd in the Ant-Man franchise. He's just so funny, he's so likable, he's so adorable. At the same time, you root for Paul Rudd, you root for him in the Ant-Man films, you root for him in the Avengers films, and here was absolutely no different. I also really enjoyed Evangeline Lilly, although I feel like she was too much of an archetypal tough girl character. I just wish the way that she was depicted wasn't quite as uptight, so that when she was working together with Ant-Man, it didn't feel like they were fighting. There is a way that you can depict conflict within a team or within a pairing without making them seem kind of at odds and kind of gritty towards each other, and I think Loki and Thor are an excellent example of this, where you have that conflict, the thousands of years of conflict between them, but somehow they still have that connection, that chemistry together that works very well. And I wish I could see more of that between Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I just didn't get a sense of that in last year's film. At number 9 we have Spider-Man Homecoming. Now this is a film that, first of all, I forgot that this was actually a part of the same phase. I think it's really weird how you have a first film and its sequel in the same phase of the MCU, but that's just how long phase 3 has actually been going for, so that's pretty incredible. And also this is a film that I very much had a great time, a great experience watching in the cinema. I think it was an excellent way of introducing the character of Peter Parker within the MCU without diving into his very well known, very popular, very much parodied origin story. After the last two times Sony butchered an attempt at a Spider-Man franchise, I just very much appreciated that they just sunk right in to this story and allowed us to have fun and to really experience Peter Parker at his true peak. Tom Holland as Peter Parker, of course, is just absolutely brilliant. Much like I said in my Far From Home review, Tom Holland is really able to capture the kind of nerdiness, the geekiness of Peter Parker, his youth, his naivete, all of these elements that just make him uniquely Spider-Man. I also enjoyed the world that they kind of surrounded Spider-Man in. I was so shocked in the cinema, so shocked by the twist that Michael Keaton was in fact Liv's dad. That never even occurred to me. Like I was telling my brother the other day, that's one of the few twists in a film that I've actually just genuinely been so shocked by. So props to the film for that. But aside from that, this film is just such a light-hearted, good time at the cinema. But it's lower down on my list because I don't really feel compelled to revisit it in the way that I do some of these other films that are coming up. Some of these films just demand a rewatch upon rewatch upon rewatch, whereas this one washed over me and it was a great time. But there's no urgency to come back to this world, especially after Far From Home. I would definitely go back and rewatch that one far quicker than Homecoming. But overall, I would say Homecoming is such a fun film, such a great John Hughes tribute, but at the same time, it's not something that has the urgency of some of the Phase 3 films most definitely have. At number 8, we have Doctor Strange. Now, speaking of films that feel like they came out ages ago, Doctor Strange actually did. It is a 2016 film, again showing just how long we've been in Phase 3 for. I really appreciate this film because it's something special, it's something different when it comes to the Earth-based Marvel films. I really think that the Guardians of the Galaxy films, as well as the Thor films later on, really do such a great job of establishing the different atmosphere, the different feelings and environments that incur when you are in space versus when you are on Earth. And I feel like they have such amazing visual styles that come with that. But in contrast, a lot of the Earth-based films have definitely started to feel a bit samey. At least they did when Phase 3 hit. And so Doctor Strange offered something very special, very unique in that aspect. It wasn't afraid to play with a different kind of visual flair that differentiated that film from all of the rest. I especially liked, of course, that sequence where you have him tripping out and the Ancient One is showing him all of these different dimensions, and I love the introduction of a multi-dimensional universe in that film. I love the way that they use technology in order to display the magic in that film, and I know a lot of people have that criticism that it looks a lot like Inception, which it does. I don't think these visuals would have been possible without the existence of Inception. Talk about alternate realities. But I definitely feel like they use it very well here. And while some people might think it's not enough like magic, like Harry Potter magic, I really like this version of MCU magic. It's very distinct, it's very geometric, and I really like that aesthetic. But aside from the aesthetics and aside from the smoke and mirrors, I do really enjoy Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange. I was so excited by his entrance into the MCU. I was like, any character, anyhow that we can get this man into the MCU, do it, because I am such a huge Sherlock fan and I love him in this role. It's definitely similar to a Sherlock role. I just really loved how he was able to convey someone who has literally reached rock bottom. Like, he was in despair, he was desperate. The only person who could have possibly saved him in that kind of situation of losing his hands was himself, and he wasn't able to do anything to help himself. As a surgeon who is such an expert in his field, no one could possibly even come close to his knowledge. So that was just really heartbreaking to me to see that frustration kind of play out. Was really effective to me. I think Benedict Cumberbatch did a great job of displaying that. And at the same time, I really enjoyed, I love me a good training montage, and I really enjoyed seeing him train. I know that, again, there's a few disputes as to how long he actually trained for in order to become such an expert, but I'm assuming, a few months passed, whatever. He's a genius. I just really liked seeing him get exposed to a completely different side of the world that he never would have even thought could exist. Now, does this film waste Mads Mikkelsen? Yes. Does this film waste Tilda Swinton? No. So that's kind of the trade-off there. And also you have the fact that that ending was very unique. It wasn't actually my favorite ending. A lot of people gave it a lot of props for being so different to the usual blue beam in the sky or millions of, you know, animated bad guys coming at you type thing. And I like that aspect of it, the fact that it is very different. But at the same time, it kind of felt anticlimactic a little bit because we didn't really see him use his powers in an action sequence. But we got a lot of that later on, so I'll forgive the film for that. At number 7, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, this is coming from someone who is a huge fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one. I thought it was just such a brilliant film. It's one of those perfect snapshots into a reality that's far away from the Earth sequences with the Avengers and everyone. And it's just completely different, the surroundings and the environments that we get to experience in the space sequences. I love the dynamics between the Guardians, of course. I love Groot. But speaking of character dynamics, what really stood out to me in this film is the exploration of parenthood. That was one of the very big themes here. And I especially liked the relationship between Yondu and Rocket and how that was explored. The idea that Yondu would take on the role of a kind of adoptive father to Peter Quill, despite the fact that obviously they had some very rocky times. It was just so endearing and so touching to see just how much Peter meant to Yondu at the end of the day, and in huge contrast to Ego and his relationship with Peter. He was shady and manipulative and just full of lies and secrets, and the fact that you were able to really see that juxtaposition between someone who was biologically Peter's father but never took on the role versus Yondu, who adopted that role and really took care of Peter in his own weird way. And both of them get to come to terms with that before Yondu's ultimate sacrifice, which is just so heartbreaking. I feel like this film is largely very much under the radar because I feel like so many Marvel films come out, especially in phase 3, where 3 films were coming out every year. Yes, perhaps it doesn't have that bombastic impact the first Guardians of the Galaxy had, and it also lost that element of surprise which people had going into the first Guardians film, wondering what the hell this property was about. But it's a very endearing story. It's a very touching story about parenthood, about, you know, loss, and about developing as a person and sisterhood, and all of these amazing themes packed into this film with these really incredible characters. And what's even better is that we actually get to see these themes play out in the Infinity War saga. At number 6, we have Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I'm not even going to say too much about this one because I literally just did a review. All I will say is that, yes, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I loved Tom Holland in this role again. He just does such a good job of portraying this character. And this is a character that I'm not even hugely familiar with. I've never really been hugely invested in Peter Parker. I've seen him in many different iterations. I've seen him in the Tobey Maguire, the Andrew Garfield, the animated versions as well. I've never really been truly invested in him the way that I am with Tom Holland's iteration of the character. So props to him for that, for getting me to care about a character that I never did really care about before. But then it goes several steps further and gives us such a hilarious entry into the MCU. I think this is even funnier than Guardians Volume 2 and Ant-Man, and those are the franchises known for being comedic, but this one just gives them a run for their money. Like, Far From Home is so hilarious. It's also very well written. Again, I explored this in my review, but I just have high praise for John Watts and the team for doing something really unique when it comes to a Spider-Man film, getting him out of New York for one, and giving him a chance to explore the rest of the world and perhaps find his purpose in the world that he helped save. I really appreciated how they were able to really balance all of those themes post Endgame in this film, whilst also maintaining such a great light-hearted feel to it. And I definitely think it's more rewatchable, like I said earlier, than Homecoming, just because it has so much that you look forward to seeing. It has that urgency, that excitement factor that I thought was slightly lacking in Homecoming. And it also has Jake Gyllenhaal, which again is lacking in Homecoming, so it's definitely a plus for me. So now we're getting into the top 5 films of phase 3 of the MCU. Now this is tough because the ordering here, it could change tomorrow, it could change a week from now, it could change an hour from now. Like, these films are so close in terms of quality. I'm mostly going to be focusing on why it is that they're not higher up. So at number 5, we have Thor Ragnarok. Now, speaking of films that are just absolutely hilarious, and films that have their own distinct visual flair, and films that really show us what it means to be in space, the different environments, the different dynamics and characters, everything that's involved in exploring a different planet, several different planets in a movie. Thor Ragnarok does that spectacularly well. Taika Waititi was such a godsend to this franchise, and I actually like the Thor films. I did recently rewatch Thor the Dark World, and that second half is near unwatchable. In fact, did I watch the second half? I don't think I did. But the first half, I will stand by it because Loki just, he makes it, basically. It's definitely a film that would be way worse without the presence of Tom Hiddleston's Loki. But I definitely will stand by the first Thor film. I think it was great. I think it was Shakespearean. It was really fun. And it was a great introduction into the mythological aspect of the MCU, which we got a taste of as well in Captain America, the First Avenger, but we didn't get much of outside of that. So I really appreciated the first two Thor films for those reasons, despite their shortcomings. But here we just have a completely different story. Thor Ragnarok just came in and stole the show in 2017. Everyone was so shocked at how great it was that we kind of forgot about the Guardians Volume 2, kind of forgot about SpiderMan Homecoming. But we are going to talk about why this film isn't at number one, if I love it so much. And most of it is because it's a very contained story and doesn't really focus on aspects that I'm very invested in. At this point in the MCU, even in 2017, we definitely had storylines that we were more invested in than others. And I feel like Thor, as much as I liked his character, as much as I really like Loki, I was never really fully invested in his story arc. And secondly, I do think there was a bit of an imbalance with the villain. At this point in time, people are definitely harping on about how MCU villains are just not quite cutting it. And whilst I really enjoyed Loki, I do think that the others are a bit, you know, bad guy of the week type situation, which works perfectly fine for me, by the way. I've never had this criticism because I've never cared about villains at all, Joker included. But in this case, you do have another example of a kind of throwaway villain. Even though Hela was a substantial opponent for Thor and she was so powerful, she was able to break his hammer and she was his sister and everything was going on there, in terms of the screen time that we actually got with her and in terms of us actually being able to get inside of her mind and actually understand what her motivations are beside Odin messed up again, I think it was a bit lacking on that front. So did this film waste Cate Blanchett? Kind of. Did this film waste Jeff Goldblum? Absolutely not. He was spectacular here. There's the trade-off there. At number 4, we have Avengers Infinity War. Cue the gasps. It's only number 4. I know, it's shocking to me too. But I feel like I've already analysed this film to death. I've got 2 videos talking about what I loved and what I didn't love or hated about this film. So again, I'm not going to go into it too much here. But there were definitely elements of this film that I absolutely loved. I loved seeing the characters work together across franchises. It was just the ultimate version of the first Avengers film, just kind of realigned to bring in all of these characters that have come along since phase 1, and it was absolutely spectacular seeing them work together, even though they were kind of split up into 2 groups. Just absolutely amazing. But at the same time, there were a lot of elements that I just didn't quite gel with. I've already talked about how the Infinity Stones themselves were used in this film and how I wasn't a huge fan of that. And I also took issue with the Black Order and how they were depicted. And I've already talked about Scarlet Witch and Vision and their relationship and how that was made the central focus in the Earth sequences, which makes absolutely no sense to me because this relationship had never been established previously, but okay, whatever. Overall, I will say that whilst I really enjoyed Infinity War for the same reasons that you probably did, there were some elements to it that I wasn't a huge fan of, and as a result I have to, again, we're splitting hairs here, we're really splitting hairs and looking for reasons to differentiate these films, and I have to put it at number 4 as a result. At number 3, we have Avengers 2.5, also known as Captain America Civil War. Now, this film had so much hype surrounding it. I remember just getting so excited for this film. I don't know what it is about Winter Soldier and Civil War, but they were really able to capture my attention from start to finish faultlessly. I'm a huge Team Cap fan, so I really liked his depiction here. I like the fact that everyone on their respective teams were there because it made sense for them to be there. Even though I do think that the film could have done a better job of exploring the different motivations of each characters, of each of the Avengers on the respective teams. But I do feel like in terms of how the teams were placed, it made sense. But at the same time, the philosophical discussions surrounding the Sokovian Accords were so complex that you could actually argue for both sides. You could see the perspectives of both Steve and Tony and really relate to them and really understand where they're coming from. The only reason why I was so staunchly on Team Cap is because of Tony's past and just how much of a wreck he's been in the past and how hypocritical he came across in this film. And it really frustrated me, to be honest. Another factor that really puts this above Avengers Infinity War, in my opinion, are the action sequences. The action sequences are so sick in these Russo films. I love Captain America Winter Soldier. I love the hand-to-hand combat sequences there. Are you kidding? They were amazing. And again, here they delivered with that. My favorite one is actually not the airport sequence, and it's not the end sequence with Tony Stark fighting against Steve with Bucky there as well. I actually really love that sequence that starts off with Bucky in his like apartment, his busted up flat, and Steve is there and the SWAT team is there to come get him, and that kind of escalates towards Black Panther finding him on the roof there and just appearing with bullets flying at him, and it doesn't even matter because he doesn't feel a thing with that vibranium suit. Oh my god. And then that goes into that bike chase sequence under that tunnel with the cars just flashing by through him, and you have that slow shot of the Winter Soldier turning round, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. I love that fight sequence. It's so well choreographed, and the way that it moves from place to place is so well done. But again, there are just so many great action sequences in this film, and they are just so well done. The Russos are really able to capture the true impact of the action, and it feels real. It feels like it's hitting you just as hard as it's hitting them, and that's something that I felt like was missing from both Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. And number 2, we have my pick for last year's very best film, and that is of course Black Panther. Now again, I've already given this film a review per my best films of 2018 list, so I'm just going to go ahead and link that down below as my battery is running out. But I will say that this film was just so special to me. Obviously I'm black, obviously I'm a huge fan of the MCU. It was just such a beautiful combination of the two, and it really delivered. You know, I was always going to have a special place for this film, whether it was amazing or perhaps not as amazing as I wanted it to be, but the fact that it actually delivered, the fact that it was just so phenomenal and largely universally appraised, it was just the frosting on the cake, the cherry on top, the whole sundae even. I love the character of T'Challa. When we meet him in this film, he is the king of Wakanda. He has taken on this huge responsibility. This huge legacy has been placed on his shoulders after his father's death, and he has to come to terms with that. He has to come to terms with his roles as both a warrior and a leader. Chadwick Boseman does such a good job of displaying the regalness, the intelligence, the quiet pensiveness of this character. He's not a showy, funny type Quill or even Sam Wilson type character. Like, he's a very different MCU character, and I appreciate that about him immensely. It does mean that he's not quite as electric, he's not quite as, you know, jazzy and charismatic as some of the other MCU main characters, but I don't think it's necessary for everyone to be like that. I think it's okay for people to have different personalities within the MCU. I just appreciate the uniqueness factor of having a king like T'Challa, who's very much different to another royal that we are very well acquainted with in the form of Thor, who has relinquished his responsibilities time and time again and never really taken them seriously until the very end of Thor Ragnarok, and even then that's quickly ripped away from him by Thanos. I also, of course, really enjoyed the depiction of Killmonger by Michael B. Jordan. I think his performance in that film is untouchable. It is flawless. I love the way that he had such a complex argument to make. You could see things from all these different angles, all these different sides, and a testament to just how effective he was as a villain is the fact that T'Challa at the end of the day was forced to employ some of Eric Killmonger's philosophy and some of his suggestions. Even though his methods were very questionable because of course he was the villain, he wasn't completely wrong, and as a result T'Challa had to come to terms with that and come to terms with what Nakia had been saying from the very beginning and employ those changes. On top of the excellent story elements of this film, you have of course the amazing costuming, the amazing score, the music, the soundtrack is just absolutely phenomenal, so on point. I love the exploration of Afrofuturism. I love the invention of Wakanda here, and its depiction, just this first dive into an African country, which, yeah, is fictional, but it's hopeful. It's full of, you know, hope and optimism, which is something that is not very often associated with the continent of Africa, and I think was absolutely phenomenal to see in such a popular franchise like the MCU. And finally, at number 1, was there ever any doubt? You have, of course, Avengers Endgame. Now again, I have a review on this film. In fact, I have 2, one spoiler, one non-spoiler, so we're not going to get into this too heavily here, but I will say that this film is just so incredible in the way that it's able to wrap up all of these different storylines across so many films at this point. I mean, just look at the list for only phase 3, right? And it's able to do so effectively. It's organic. It's just carefully and lovingly written into this huge tapestry that is this film. You have every single character in the original Avengers being given great justice here, including Hawkeye, who people have made fun of for the longest time now, but I think he was done very, very well in this film. You have, of course, Iron Man giving the ultimate sacrifice the way that he did in the first Avengers film, to be fair, but he never really got a huge consequence from that, apart from his PTSD, which was largely dropped after Iron Man 3. I did say in a previous video, I'm not sure which one, that I already anticipated that Iron Man would die because of Infinity War and that scene that he has with Thanos and the way that he's stabbed and everything, but that didn't take away from the actual scene itself. I thought it was very emotional. I didn't cry because, like I said, I'm not a huge Iron Man fan, but I do think that it was done very well and did justice to the big Iron Man fans out there. Now, my fan base is largely Team Cap, and like I've already said, I think Infinity War did him no justice. It did him dirty, in fact. I really felt vindicated seeing his presence here. However, after seeing the film a second time, I did feel a little bit bitter about the ending. I don't think it quite did him justice, even though for the film on its own it works so well and it's such a beautiful moment. I do feel like for the sake of that beautiful moment, they sacrificed years upon years of character development for Steve Rogers, because there is no way in hell, no matter how you slice it, he would actually go back and go after Peggy and live a happy life knowing that, you know, everything with Bucky and Hydra and everything is happening in the meantime. Like, there's so many issues with that ending when you actually think about it, but just separate from the rest of the MCU, it works really well for the context of that film alone. But this film is not a standalone film. It's definitely in the middle. It's at the center of all of these other films surrounding it. And so it does leave a kind of sour taste in my mouth when I think about the implications of the ending that they gave Captain America. But I digress. I think overall this film it's fantastic. They delivered on everything that fans really wanted and gave us things that we never even knew we wanted, and very much welcomed with both hands. So now that I told you guys how I would rank the films in phase 3 of the MCU, it's time for you guys to let me know what your rankings would be down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe so you can catch any new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.